Welcome to Life Drawing 2301. I'm kidding. Our subjects will be coming out shortly. Welcome this morning. Thank you for being here so early. My name is Tom Linney, and I work for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. I have the distinct privilege of moderating this panel today. Careers in animal law is a very popular topic, and it's really what's on everyone's mind, and not just because I said it right now. But there's a lot of opportunities, I think, in animal law, whether it's working in the nonprofit world and being a private practitioner, thinking about non-traditional careers in animal law. So there's really a lot of opportunities in the field, and I think our panelists today will be able to speak to that in light of their very diverse backgrounds. First up is Nikkis Caferri. She's the chief of the newly created Animal Cruelty Prosecutions Unit at Queens County, the DA's office there. She's a career prosecutor. She's very tough. I would not cross her. She works closely with the NYPD's Animal Cruelty Investigation Squad. I'll let her talk about her really. It's very neat and involved recent process. But when I reached out to our panelists, I wanted to ask them, what they wanted to do when they were kids, or what they thought they wanted to do for a living, and just think about the evolution of what we want to do in our lives, and also what they were doing when they were at the age of 24, since it's the 24th annual Animal Law Conference. And so Nikki, many people don't know, but I think she inspired the kid Ralphie, the character from A Christmas Story, because there's a picture of her with Tenny, her dog, and she's in this giant, super huge, puffy jacket. If anyone's seen A Christmas Story. But Tenny was a beautiful dog that helped influence her and get her on her path to animal protection eventually. At 24, she was a trust and estates paralegal and had just began applying to law school. And I mention that too because I feel like we definitely have a younger audience to some degree who's debating on where they are now in their life and trying to give you some idea of how much their careers may have evolved over time. Up next, we have Lora Dunn. She's the interim director and staff attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Criminal Justice Program. She assists prosecutors and law enforcement around the country with animal cruelty laws. She's done some really amazing work in our amicus brief work on several seminal cases in animal cruelty, which you should talk to her about. I'll let her expand upon that, but she's an adjunct professor as well at the Lewis and Clark Law School. And at 24, she was an associate managing editor at Carnegie Hall. And here's a picture of her as a kid. And so she has, I think animal abusers everywhere weren't really knowing what they were getting themselves into. They had no idea she was tougher than that she might lead on. Our next panelist is Jane Hoffman. She's president and the board chair of the Mayor's Alliance for the New York City's Animals. She's an attorney. She's worked in private practice, and she helped found the Mayor's Alliance. And she's also a founding member and a former section and chair of the New York City Bar Association Committee. At 24, she was in library school, which is, I know, for me, that was like the dream, was library school. I'm just joking, but no. And here's her at 24, right before, we couldn't get this to work, so I apologize, but at 24, she was about to leave to Europe, and I made them put these pictures together last minute, so it was kind of them to do that. Our next panelist is Mariann Sullivan. She's a lecturer in law at Columbia Law School, and she's also the host of the Animal Law Podcast, which many of you may have heard. And if you haven't signed up for their emails, you should definitely do that. It's very interesting and very timely updates on the animal law world. She's worked as a deputy chief court attorney at the New York State Appellate Division. She's taught animal law and farm animal law at Lewis and Clark, NYU, Brooklyn, and Cardozo. She served as chair also of the Animal Law Committee of the New York City Bar. And at 24, she was in grad school at Columbia for library science. And this is her, if you want to get an impression of how amazing that hair was. And how,
I don't know how I did it.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
And our final panelist is Amy Trakinski. She's the managing director of VegInvest. They're a mission-driven investment firm which provides early-stage capital to companies that focus on providing alternatives to the use of animals. She's also practiced animal law for 18 years. One of the first speakers that I saw when I was getting into animal law in law school at one of the National Animal Law Conferences that's put on. And she's litigated on behalf of animal protection organizations. She's done work for grassroots advocacy groups and also individual clients, and she's on the board of Animal Welfare Trust, Compassion Over Killing, so much more. And she wanted to be a vet or a farmer growing up, and here's a picture of her about to give Betty a kiss. Betty is her parakeet, I believe, and super adorable. But at 24, she was in book publishing, and she was thinking she'd go back to school for art history, and ended up deciding to follow her passion and become an animal rights lawyer, which I think for many people at that time and even now, we're still trying to figure out what that is and how that's going to evolve and how you're going to be able to do it. And so it's really a pleasure of mine to be able to moderate this panel and really have this esteemed group of my colleagues here. So I'll open the floor. We'll have a couple minutes. We'll let them talk, and then we'll start some Q&A and just ask some questions and get things going. So, Nikki, maybe we'll start with you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Can you hear me, or do I need to pull the mic over? Good. Okay. I have been a lawyer for a long time, and it's a long odyssey to have gotten me here today. And I'm just going to backtrack a little bit to tell you about how I got to form my present unit and why I did it. I was a career prosecutor and worked on many, many cases over my many, many years as a prosecutor, and I was a deputy chief in the Appeals Bureau, and in that capacity, I assigned every brief, and that was about 400 briefs a year. We had a very large bureau. I get this case nobody wants, and it's an animal cruelty case, which in 24 years I had never seen before, that went to trial, and it was actually a beautifully tried case, and I was shocked that I had never seen it. Now, nobody wants this assignment, so I say, I'm going to take this assignment. This is of interest to me. And it went to our high court, the Court of Appeals in New York, and as I prepared the brief, because it is a policy court, I wanted to represent the rights of animals and advocacy groups, as well as do the statutory construction on our statute. And it was kind of an interesting issue that our misdemeanor statute, I was arguing, had no mens rea to it. We did not have to prove intent. And the trial court had actually ruled that, and the intermediate appellate court had ruled the same. And this is how I met Lora Dunn from ALDF, because Lora got on board and did an amicus brief in that case on the issue of financial hardship, because the defendant had claimed he starved his dog to death and left him tied up for months on end in the backyard because he couldn't afford to feed his poor dog. It was a good ending for the dog. He is rescued and saved and adopted. But that's how I began to get very interested in this. And it was speaking with representatives from HSUS, ALDF, the ASPCA. At the same time, the NYPD had taken over the law enforcement arm of the ASPCA. So this was a huge shift in law enforcement, and the FBI was now reclassifying animal cruelty as a crime for NIBRS purposes, for reporting purposes, as a Group A offense, which is the highest, along with homicide and assaults and robberies and arsons. And so this was a big shift, and so now what I'm learning is the link between animal cruelty and human violence, and law enforcement, which is traditionally very conservative, is taking note of this very same thing, that the animal cruelty is a red flag. And so as a part of the law enforcement community, I think we need to look at these people and the criminals that are at the same time that doing animal cruelty, they're also engaged in various other types of violence and other crimes. So after I win the case, and gratefully, Lora helped me so much with that, participated in the mood. I had lots of volunteers, which was another thing that really surprised me, because traditionally lawyers are extremely competitive and hold their information very close to the vest. I had people coming out of the woodwork to help me, to share their views, and it was a very interesting experience for me because I'd not experienced that before. And so when I win the case, I went to my DA, Richard Brown, the Queens County DA, who's very big on innovative and cutting-edge type of prosecution, community-based education and other programs. And I said, I think it's time to do this. I think we should make a unit, and I think I should be the head of it. So he agreed, which was great. So I have actually been a lawyer. I had been a lawyer for 30 years before I came to this place. So you don't necessarily have to start out that way, but if you want to, that's great, because Lora is a good example of that, certainly. Hannah Laufer is in the audience, who's my legal intern. She's starting out that way as a law student intern. But it took me 30 years to get here, and now I am very excited by what I'm doing. It's actually frightening how many cases I have accumulated since January, and they are across the board. They're from, just generally violence, domestic violence, where a boyfriend will kill the cat or dog of his girlfriend. I have a cockfighting case. I have a dog fighting case. I have multiple hoarding cases. I have general gang violence, where one gang member will, attack someone else's dog. Neighbor disputes, where they attack each other's dogs. And so I have this range, and I'm very excited by it. So while I would otherwise be on the verge of retiring from public service as a prosecutor, I am now gung-ho, and I'll be working pretty much till I'm dead doing this type of prosecution as long as they let me. So that's my story.
And we can't let Nikki retire because she does absolutely amazing work. So as Tom mentioned, I actually started out in book publishing as well, right out of undergrad. But I came to animal law in a bit of a convoluted way. I, in college, had read Peter Singer, Animal Liberation. That really changed my life. But at the time, I was a philosophy major, and everyone said, well, you have to go to law school or you just don't have any job prospects at all. And I didn't know about animal law. So I went a different route, went into book publishing, worked up at Carnegie Hall, a few dozen blocks north of here in my 20s, and then ended up discovering Lewis and Clark Law School and the animal law program, and then really just dedicated myself through that time to finding each and every opportunity that I could and committing myself to those opportunities when they came along. I was fortunate to take classes with people like Joyce Tischler, the mother of animal law, and I connected with the former director of the criminal justice program at ALDF my first year of law school. And really, what I try to tell law students is, when you get an opportunity to do something like that, commit to it. Show that that is your time to shine and to show that you can do the work. I stuck with that clerkship all throughout law school, and that for me turned into a job. So I just like to tell people it's very tempting in law school to try to take advantage of anything and everything that comes along. For me, I think that it's better and more valuable for your career to, of course, take advantage of as many opportunities as you can, but also commit yourself in a way that is doable. So don't overextend yourself. I know that's very difficult to say to law students, but I was very fortunate to end up where I am. So the criminal justice work, as Tom mentioned, we assist prosecutors and law enforcement. We do trainings. We provide resources and kind of backup support for prosecutors that are working on these animal cruelty cases. I absolutely love my job. I love teaching at Lewis and Clark, and I feel very fortunate. I really enjoy the amicus brief work, which is not everyone's cup of tea, but being able to connect with folks like Nikki, who I absolutely revere, who have been doing this work for so long and who absolutely get it and are living it and making the world a better place with their expertise. I'm very fortunate, so that's my story.
Well, I took a very circuitous route. Can you hear me? I'll use my lifeguard voice. And obviously, the way to animal law career is through library school, as you can see.
So you've all done the wrong thing.
Right. You're screwed from the beginning. I first went into law, actually, I wanted to be a paralegal, I thought, or I wasn't really sure, but I wanted to check out law, so I went to paralegal school. And then I got out, and I realized that actually what I had liked about the paralegal was the research end of it. So I figured, okay, I'll go to library school. So I went to library school. I got a job on working for a Wall Street firm in a tax library, and I then decided that I was like making a tenth of what the lawyers were making, and I was much smarter than them. So I went to law school at night. And I worked at night. I went to law school for 4 years, and I graduated, and I went to work for a Wall Street firm. I was at Simpson, Thacher, and Bartlett. And while I was there, I actually was approached by a woman Jolene Mariann, who's no longer with us. She passed away. It's only the good die young. And she asked me to work with another person, a colleague of mine who was at Simpson Thacher, to start an animal law committee at the New York City Bar Association, because she thought this was really a very important thing to start to have these committees. And it was really the first and biggest one. And actually, during that, I was able to meet some really interesting people, and of course, Joyce, the mother of animal law, and all that followed. ALDF sponsored a conference at the New York City Bar on the legal status of non-human animals, which was really, I think, a seminal moment. I think there's still tapes of that. I know that they published the transcript of it. It was really amazing legal minds that came together. And David Wilson, who's also a very close friend of Mariann and I. And actually, it's David and Mariann's fault that I'm the president of the Mayor's Alliance for New York City's Animals. I'm sure they thought it was a good idea at the time, but here I am almost 15 years later. So anyway, while I was on the committee, Mariann, and mostly her, and I wrote a letter to the incoming administration of Mayor Bloomberg to say, hey, I think we have this idea. There's this foundation, this private family foundation in California, Maddie's Fund. If we can pull together this collaboration, we'll need to work with the city. We think we can bring a lot of money into New York City to help with companion animal issues. And unfortunately, they read it, and they thought this was a great idea, private money. Mike loved public-private partnerships. This was a model for that. And thus was born the Mayor's Alliance for New York City's Animals, which is what I am doing today.
I think I was invited on as the cautionary tale, since I've never made any money at doing animal law, so don't do what I did. But I have, it has given great meaning to my life. I really didn't come to the animal issue until I was pretty well, really in my 40s. It was just kind of, I had a dog. It's the first time I had had a dog of my own. I'd grown up with them, and somebody randomly mentioned to me that they weren't eating eating meat because of the way the animals were treated, and it just, those moments, it just got in somehow. Or it's not like I hadn't known that meat was made out of animals before that, but and it really changed my life around. And really, I was working as a court attorney in the appellate division. It was a good job. There was no way I was going to leave it and try to start a new career. So and this has really been the trajectory of my experience with animal law. I just sought community, and I was lucky enough to find it. And that's how I met Jane, because I found that New York City Bar Association Animal Law Committee, which was one of the few in the country by then. It had been the first one. And now it's just so great that those committees are everywhere, and that people can find them and find people who feel the same way. And one thing led to another. I met David Wolfson also through that committee. He and I were both particularly interested in the farm animal issue. So we actually managed to get together, and write an article that was published in a book. It was easy to get published because nobody wrote about this stuff. So, and we managed not to kill each other during that process, though we came very, very close. Don't write with close friends. It's really hard. And we wrote a couple of other law review articles. And as I said, there weren't a lot of people writing on this issue. So when law reviews were looking for those articles, it was easy to find. Now, law review articles, as everybody knows, nobody ever reads them. They're a total waste of your time. But they're not necessarily, because one thing leads to another. And as a result of having published a few articles, I managed to get my first adjunct teaching job. Now, you might think, well, she made some money, but believe me, feel very sorry for your adjunct professors. They're not making any money doing this for you. It's a gift. It is a little money, but it's very pitiful. But it's a great way to meet people. Every year, I still teach. I've taught at Brooklyn College, Brooklyn Law School, that's where I started, and Cardozo, and now I teach at Columbia. I've also taught at Lewis and Clark, which is a wonderful experience, and at NYU, and it's every year you get all of these students, as I know you know, because you're in those classes, who really have no idea what's going on. And it creates a conversation, and that's what, as I said, so much of my trajectory has just been seeking community, and teaching is a great way to do that. I encourage all of you to think about bringing that into your career at some point, because we need more courses. I mean, we need something, there's just the core course. Right now, but we need more courses. We need a companion animal law class in every law school. We need a farmed animal law class in every law school. And again, one thing led to another. As I was teaching, my partner and I, Jasmine Singer, decided that we would start a podcast, and we did. And we brought in some legal issues, and we also had a blog, and we really wanted to focus on grassroots activism and what everybody can do, because there's no way, this is a big lift that we're all working on to change the way the world thinks and feels about animals, and change the way they're treated. It goes into the deepest parts of the human psyche and every activity that humans participate in. So everybody's got to participate. Everybody who wakes up to this issue has to do their bit. And there are so many people who are doing cool things. And again, it was a way of creating community, of showing people who were wondering, what can I do to help animals? Well, here's something that somebody else is doing, up in North Dakota. That's a really good idea. And yes, there are people in North Dakota working for animals. There really are. I think they just opened a vegan restaurant in Fargo. I swear. Somebody's nodding in the back. So yeah. And then we started our podcast, and again, a way of creating community. And then I also started the Animal Law Podcast, which has just been an amazing experience, because I get to talk to almost all of my episodes, not every single one, most of them are actual lawyers who have actually litigated really significant cases of it. Stephen Wise, I've had Justin Marceau, who will be speaking here later on the ag cases, and I get to just ask questions. It's so much easier to ask questions than to answer them. This is an important thing to remember in life. But again, for me, it's a way of creating community. Like, I can reach so many more people and so many more students, and I hear from a lot of people who aren't even lawyers who enjoy listening to it, because they're so hungry. People who want to change the world are so hungry to find out about how the law works. They don't really understand. They're intimidated by it, but they know that this is the thing that governs animals' lives. This is the thing that governs all of our lives, and it isn't that understandable if, just because they don't know what somebody means when they say res judicata, it doesn't mean they don't get the gist of the podcast. And that's been a really wonderful discovery, finding out how many people are hungry for this information and to understand how the law works. And so it's just another way of creating community, spreading the word, and not making any money really, but it's been a lot of fun. I don't know, but I don't think I can move it. Oh, there. It's okay.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to go off what Mariann and Jane, two longtime friends and colleagues.
Tell the story of how we met.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to tell. So I don't think any of us can overemphasize the importance of relationships when trying to work in this field. I think that's where you find your opportunities. So when I started, as Tom said, I went to law school to do animal rights law. I didn't even know what that meant exactly. I was still eating animals. I had a vague familiarity with the work of PETA, who was a young organization. I think they were about 5 or 6 years old at the time. So off I went to law school, and I was told by the placement office at my law school that when I explained what I wanted to do when I got out, that was nice, but I wouldn't lead with that at an interview. And so I completed 3 years of law school, and there was no animal law course. I went to Cardozo, where Mariann now has taught animal law. And I did a couple of other things, other types of work for a couple of years, and really didn't want to be a lawyer except to work for the animals. And it was at a panel discussion at the bar, actually. I don't think the one Jane referred to, but it was the farm down. It was like in 97, 98. There was a panel discussion on farmed animals. And it was like lifting the veil for me. I don't know how I actually was somebody who went to law school to do animal rights. And I didn't even realize there wasn't such a thing as animal rights. And I went to this panel, and I learned about all the conditions that farmed animals had to endure. And it was in particular battery hens who really did it for me. And I went from not being vegetarian overnight to being vegan. And it just changed my life. Suddenly, again, the kind of the veil was lifted. And soon thereafter, my ex-partner and I, we opened a law practice. Our first client was Rainforest Relief. We did some criminal defense of activists who were locking down in Home Depot to protest the use of old-growth forest wood for decking and stuff like that. But it was not directly, there were habitat issues, but this wasn't directly related to animals. So somebody suggested I go check out the New York City Bar Association's Animal Law Committee. And this was early years, and I remember Jane was the chair, I believe. I think that's how we all met. And I met Jane and I met David. And that year, Pace Law School used to put on a great animal law conference. And I went to that conference and met Mariann, and later, a couple of days later, I decided to go. Every year, the Ringling Circus walks their elephants, or they used to walk them through the Midtown Tunnel, I believe. And there were protests. They used to be bigger in the day. But anyway, I went to one of these protests because that year a baby elephant had died in the hands of Ringling, a baby elephant by the name of Kenny. And there was a big turnout for this protest, and as the circus and the elephants and the animals came through the tunnel and started making their way to Madison Square Garden, this group of activists started chasing the elephants and the trainers, screaming, "Where's Kenny? Where's Kenny?" And I found myself bumping up against this woman who was screaming louder than anybody.
I have a very big voice.
Yeah, and it was Mariann, and we've been friends ever since. And through these guys, through David Wolfson in particular, we were introduced to Farm Sanctuary and Gene Bauer. He was our first first animal client back in '98, I think. At the time, the state of New Jersey the legislature had passed a few years prior an amendment to the animal cruelty law, basically calling for the drafting of a list of humane standards for farmed animals, which on its face sounds better than it is, because later in the amendment to the law, anything not on this list was basically exempted from prosecution. So it was basically a common practice, list of practices that were going to be exempted from prosecution. And that was our first case we worked on Farm Sanctuary with. And from there, again, going to conferences like this, we met folks from ALDF. We had worked with ALDF many times. I mean, all these spaces. Kim, I met through Animals Agenda. Kim used to run, Kim Strollwood in the front row, was the founder of a magazine called Animals Agenda. So it really is, I think I've always been an activist first and a lawyer second. So during the 17 years of practice, I had a lot of great opportunities to do farmed animal work. We worked mostly in litigation, prosecuting zoos and circuses and factory farms, or at least assisting prosecutors where we weren't able to do it directly. And then about a year ago, I became interested and actually after all these years had a more positive outlook than I did a few years. I used to be a bitter vegan. Now I'm a less bitter vegan. But realized that the world... in private. But the world is changing, and I think, when I went vegan, most people didn't even know what the word meant or could not pronounce it. And now I think there's much more of a recognition of what is happening in terms of how we're raising animals for food, and just the disaster it is for the animals, for the environment, for our health. And I became interested in sort of the world of vegan and plant-based startups, and somehow was lucky enough to talk somebody into giving me a job with a newly formed fund. And so that's what I do now. I work with a fund who is investing. Many of you probably heard Chris Kurt speak yesterday. So this fund is similar. It's called VegInvest. It's a smaller fund, but we also have a somewhat broader mission. We invest in food companies, but also other kinds of companies who are taking animals out of the supply chain. We've invested in recently a company called Emulate, an interesting company that is working on developing organs on a chip to replace animal testing. In part for the humane issues, but also because animal testing is incredibly ineffective, and most people who work in that area will admit that. So that's my story.
Well, we'd like to open it up for Q&A, so if anyone has any questions to start things.
If I could just say one thing before any questions, if
Sure.
any. The other thing that I would recommend you do is if an opportunity to serve on a board comes along, I would grab it. And a lot of times, whether we deserve it or not, we're lawyers, we have some kind of gravitas, supposedly. I'm on the board of Farm Sanctuary. Mariann and I have been on the board of Farm Sanctuary, and that's been one of the best experiences of my life. Again, it expands the circle of people you're going to meet, because there's going to be other people on that board who are obviously not lawyers, and they've come at their awakening from another angle, and you never know what those kind of connections are going to do for you later in life or later in your career. So I think joining bar association committees is really, really important. Just the formation of them was important. I went out to UCLA, and Mariann, of course, Mariann writes all my material, and I just talk.
Only the good stuff.
Right, and, went and talked about the importance of animal law committees in bar associations as a way to advance the law. So if you have an opportunity as a student member or as a member to join whatever your local bar association, or go and ask them to start a committee if they don't have one, because that's an incredible way to meet people. The current membership of, and Nikki's on with me, is public servants, corporations, private practice. I mean, all areas, because as Mariann said, we touch, the law touches everything in America now, and we use animals for everything. So no matter what your background is, estates and trusts. Lawyers wrote an incredibly important pamphlet, brochure, whatever, about, taking care of your animal after your death kind of thing. So no matter what area of practice I was doing tax law, for God's sake. I mean, no matter what practice, what area of practice you go into, you can find a way to animal law, you really can, either through your work, maybe doing pro bono, because that was a big thing at Simpson, to do pro bono. You can ask to do those kind of cases, so, just go in as many, I know you were saying go deep, but if you have opportunities to serve on boards, to be on bar association committees, I think that's a really, really important thing to do.
If I may just echo what Jane said, I became a member of the New York City Bar Association Animal Law Committee right after my appointment as the chief of the Animal Prosecutions Unit. And while I had sort of a narrow view with respect to what I was doing for animal cruelty and law enforcement, being on that committee has opened my eyes to issues I had never before considered in my entire life. And it has expanded my horizon beyond what I ever would have imagined. So I really do encourage you to become a member of a student member if you are a student, or a regular member if not, for a bar association. And that bar association happens to be particularly active on any number of issues, and it has really changed my life.
And if I can add something to what Jane said, and I know this is getting a little old home week, but I have to say Jane and I both served on the board of Animals Agenda, which is a magazine that Kim Stallwood published, and it's easy to forget that we didn't have the internet. You couldn't find out anything. You didn't know what the groups were. Like Peter would run a little ad in the back of magazines, and you would see, we didn't have the internet. That magazine was incredibly valuable to so many people coming up in the movement at that time, because it was, also things were being published. You didn't know what was the good one, which was the bad one. So you are so privilege. I know now it's kind of a mountain of information, and then it was none, so it's the opposite problem. But really, it's so much easier to weed through what the good stuff is and what the bad stuff is, and who's telling the truth and who isn't, and so your careers and your knowledge can go on an enormous trajectory. But that was an incredibly valuable experience in my finding out what was going on with animals and meeting people who, again, a way of creating community.
If I can just add one thing before questions that I meant to mention, and I said don't overextend yourself, but if you have the opportunity during law school to testify before a legislature, do it. It's fantastic public speaking experience. It's great on your resume. I had the opportunity as a law student to get involved in legislation that we were working on through ALDF in Oregon. That was a phenomenal experience, and then I did lobbying, after law school as an attorney for more legislation. It's scary the first time that you do it when you sit in front of these people, but guess what? As a law student, you probably know more about the law than many of the people sitting up there. And again, it's phenomenal public speaking experience. They want to hear from local folks, whether you're just in that state for law school. They want to hear about your experience, why you care, and you really can make a difference for animals by providing that testimony. So just a plug for get involved in legislative work.
I think we had a question.
Actually, it was perhaps not so much a question as a suggestion. My background is 25 years in financial services and corporate law, and one of the things we've been talking about being on boards, something to consider in your law school program is to think about taking courses that are, on the dark side, so to speak, but take corporate law courses, learn corporate governance, yes, take your animal law courses, but, make sure that you remember, tax can be useful. These organizations need help, and one of the ways that you can help them is through those kinds of skills. There are also programs out there that will help you with training, for example, around boards. For example, the United Way in New York City has sort of a board directors program that involves matching people up afterwards with boards. So don't forget to sort of use those opportunities as well as a complement to what you're doing. It also helps you understand other perspectives. And as we can see, one of the things, again, securities regulation, another field, if you're looking at the fact that there is now fundraising, potentially to support startups, animal-friendly securities lawyers sounds kind of like a weird kind of combination. But again, there are other things that you can potentially do to support the cause.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in my present job, I'm just learning these issues. I've spent my career as a litigator, And now in this role, I'm also sort of serving as in-house counsel. And first of all, it's very interesting, actually. Our first big issue that came up was the way we were formed, we actually weren't accredited investors. So that was the first sort of sticky wicket I had to address. But those kind of issues also, as Michelle Simon was talking about, food laws becoming very big for people who want to work for the animals, especially with a lot of these companies. They're not, the government is still trying to figure out, scratching its head, how do we regulate these companies? How do we regulate a cultured animal product company? Ironically, that sounds like something new and strange to people as opposed to new, let's say, plant-based animal replacements. But it's the plant-based companies who are actually being more regulated at this moment. And the issues are coming up with Hampton Creek, as many of you, as Just Mayo, that you might have heard about. But that's, I think, a burgeoning field for people who want to.
And their scope, I think, as well, writes in interesting papers as well as a law student, and perhaps differentiate yourself from some of the people who are writing sort of in the more traditional areas in animal law, but look at the crossover areas. And you develop that kind of expertise, you're making yourself appealing from a career perspective to a couple of different groups, and that's something to consider.
I believe you had a question.
Nicoletta, I wanted to speak with you. I've been an attorney, but I've been an activist since I was a teenager. I had worked for Greenpeace and Jeremy Rifkin, and I had done a big action here in New York City for Earth Day, and there were 5,000 participants. Anyhow, right now I am volunteering for a rescue organization, and I'm from Madison, Connecticut, Westbrook, Essex vicinity. And unfortunately, our group, we are now relying on animal control and the police department to be kind of on board with what we want to do to save animals. And we do have a really wonderful organization. It's strictly volunteer. Our problem is that animal control is very far behind. And when you said that your eyes had opened when you kind of connected with these other individuals, that's our problem, is that animal control is very, very far behind. And, linking up with all of you who are interested in animal law, it's sort of we rely on the police department and animal control to make the connection so that the prosecutions can happen. And that's our dilemma.
It's a difficult dilemma that's presented in many jurisdictions. And I think that the answer to it is twofold. First, in education and training, that is essential for animal control officers and police officers as well. I know the NYPD has done unbelievable training. I attended their training. It's a full day, 8-hour course that everyone in the department was required to attend, from patrol to brass. And so that's one area. The other area is just informing relationships. Your local prosecutors really need to form the relationships with the animal control and the PD in the area, so that, because it does take a village, it is a community, and everyone has to be on board. So, for example, before I even became the chief of my unit, the NYPD had this great unit to investigate in a whole squad, but they said to me their frustration was in not having a prosecutor to bring the cases to. So everyone really has to work together. So I would, recommend that you reach out, that you hold events, that you hold trainings, and that you develop the relationships. That's really the most important thing, for you to be on board together. And, even if you hold a breakfast or do a training or a free lecture, that's one way. And really all it takes is one person in the organization to be turned around, and they can influence everybody else. And that's what I felt that happened with my position, and that happened in the NYPD as well.
Well, since you're in that position, are you in a position also to give training?
I do that. I have to, yes, I do. I am in a position to do that. And there are lots of people, certainly ALDF is the premier organization for training of law enforcement. There's a great Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, Animal Cruelty conference that we all just attended. And that is great training for investigators, for animal control officers. Vets attend it, prosecutors attend it. So
You know,
I would
the-
recommend looking into
Yeah.
some
You know,
training.
the other thing is just often just supporting the animal control officer. I
Yes.
know they're often seen as the adversary, and they have professional organizations that have conferences that sometimes they can't afford to go to, like SAWA, the Society of Animal Welfare Administrators, and NACA, which is the National Animal Control Association. Or sponsor them to go to one of those conferences and go to an animal rights conference. I mean, I know, people are always, for the longest time, people were saying animal control or, as the enemy, and they're the front line. I mean, they're the ones who get these animals in, and by and large, some of them are just hacks, and they got the jobs because there was nowhere else for them to get, and they're the uncle who is the mayor or something. But a lot of them really, really care. So think about your group reaching out and offering to sponsor to go to either NACA, SAWA, or one of the, animal-related conferences that might open their eyes to stuff.
National Sheriff's Association also comes to, National Sheriff's Association comes to mind. They have a whole animal cruelty section that they do a great job with.
And if that doesn't work, sue them. We've had to do that.
Spoken like a lawyer.
But as Nikki mentioned, so ALDF, what my department does in part is training for law enforcement and prosecutors. So we do free trainings for animal control for sheriff's offices.
So get her
and so
card
on.
before you leave.
And we'll probably send Nikki out, but.
Go ahead.
I was wondering, this is a careers in animal law, but as far as animal lawyers go, how many people are really dedicating their entire time and working career to animal law versus are doing another area of law and then working for animal law pro bono?
How many of us, or how many?
Well, I mean, I don't know, in your experience in
wider
the
world.
field, is it kind of rare for somebody to just be able to dedicate their entire career to animal law without working in another area of law?
Well, there aren't that, as you probably already know, there aren't that many jobs. I mean, animals don't have money, so all the money that animal protection organizations have come from people who care about animals, and it's not an enormous amount. I mean, certainly ALDF staff has gotten tremendously bigger than it used to be. HSUS has a large legal department. But I think that you have to think also just more broadly about what being an animal lawyer is, like the work that Amy is talking about, and there will need more and more of that kind of regulatory work. Helping these plant-based companies get their footing. So having that expertise in food law and administrative law. And do you all know that Miyoko's cheese, have you ever looked at the package? It doesn't say cheese because they're not allowed to in California. I mean, that's outrageous. These cases have to be litigated. We have to get into the marketplace. That's being an animal lawyer. It also means, you can make money. So many of the situations that were talked about yesterday in that environmental law panel, that woman who started Blue River Law, doing environmental law, but with the idea of not just any environmental violations, but specifically focusing on factory farming. Well, a lot of those environmental law statutes have attorney's fees, so you can make a real living at that. So part of it, I think, the actual animal law jobs, well, there are more and more of them. I mean, look at Nikki, that job didn't exist until she created it, and there will be more and more of them in different places, but, there aren't that many.
And my practice was 95% animal law. So you can hang out a shingle. I mean, it's not easy, but.
And I can say.
Partnering up with somebody makes it that much easier, and there are lots of specialties. You don't have to litigate. You can litigate, but there are a wide range of things you can specialize in. Figure out what you really think the animals need, and try to find a way to work on that, because I think that's why you're all here, is to help animals.
And I can just say anecdotally that probably less than half of the people that I knew coming up through law school with me ended up getting jobs specifically in animal law, working for a nonprofit, which is how a lot of us traditionally think about doing animal law. But there are so many different ways that you can help animals. Just getting out into the legal world, getting experience working at a firm, opening your own practice, and then helping other animal organizations, working as a prosecutor, coming up through the ranks, and then carving out your own animal cruelty unit. There are so many different ways that you can help animals, maybe not as you imagined in the very immediate future, but just get out there, get experience, and it will serve you in the end, and you'll be able to bring that expertise from the firm, from your practice, working as a prosecutor, to whatever you do in the future. So.
And I have an optimistic view of it. I spend 150% of my time doing animal law, so that's all of my time. But I see a real uptick in the interest, in the awareness of all of these issues that are presented in animal law and all the various, iterations of it. So I think what we're going to see is more and more opportunity as time goes on. Certainly in my own unit, I hope to be hiring multiple attorneys and bringing them into the fold that I have, and I think that you're going to see that in all different areas, because people are aware it is not the fringe, it is mainstream issues. These are mainstream issues for most of society. So I think we're going to see more jobs available in the future in this area.
Well, there's also looking at creating public policy forums, which is actually what the Alliance is. We created a replicable model of how cities can approach their companion animal issues. But there's another friend of ours, Mina Alagapin, who has created an organization called HEART, which is educating educators about animal issues. And they've created a wonderful program. You should look at it. And they go out, the Jesuit said, give me a boy when he's 7 and he's mine for life. It's about educating children. It's educating teachers about how to educate the next generation. And they broaden their mission. It's about environment, but it's kids teaching other kids, which is much more receptive. They're much more receptive then. So it's creating those kind of organizations. And, she was an attorney, but, she's a member of the committee, and she saw the need, she saw the need for humane education. There's a law in New York State that they're supposed to provide that in schools, and nobody was doing it. Either they didn't know about it or they didn't have the resources. So it's give the organization or whatever that you're trying to help, ask them what they need, and then give it to them in the form that they need it. So it's like for your ACO, or it's for, New York State education.
I will say that in the criminal realm, there is potential opportunity to carve out a new position for yourself as an attorney with a local humane society. A lot of times those investigations teams don't have an attorney kind of in-house to help them navigate, from the crime scene all the way through the disposition of a criminal case. So you can do a lot as a lawyer, kind of at the front end, to make sure that those cases are pursued legally, that the evidence doesn't get thrown out. Oregon Humane Society, their investigations attorney created her own position. She saw that need and carved out that job for herself. So when you see those opportunities, even if that job is not posted, doesn't exist, advocate for yourself and show that those organizations that you can help them.
I think something you said, Lora, too, is just so important. This might not happen in your first job out of law school, but don't lose the passion. You might have to be in a place for a year, and you might have that goal in mind when you take the job, and just don't lose it, and work from within whatever organization you're in to create that position. Or just learn your skills and then move on to something where you can do work for animals.
Time for one quick more question, and then we'll wrap up.
Yes, I've been a member of ALDF since around 1982 or 83 and handled animal-related cases since that time. And I can tell you from experience that it's not hard to become the nut in the community who's known for I started off, I had a case, I represented a man who sued his neighbor for shooting his dog, and in the 80s and 90s, I handled probably about 9 or 10 cases like that, and there are lots of things you can do to draw animal cases. It'll be very difficult to be a full-time animal lawyer there aren't that many cases out there to support you, and many times what you'll run into is someone will come into your office for a conference if they recommend it to a lawyer in town who people know, or one of the lawyers in town who handle animal-related cases, and they'll come in, you'll have a consultation and talk to them about what your problem is, whether it's neighbors keeping the dogs, or whether they've got a vicious dog the city is trying to condemn, or I represent a cat person. I represented 8 million blackbirds our city was trying to freeze to death in 1988. I represented pit bulls when dog rings have been, fighting rings have been raided, and it's not hard to let your community know that there is a lawyer out there who will handle animal-related cases. One thing you can do, if you're in a community of any size at all, you're going to have the Humane Society, and they're probably going to have a newsletter. And for a long time, I wrote an article in our newsletter, Animals and the Law, and hundreds of people see this and see your name and know that you're interested in animal cases and that you have some knowledge about it. Most of these newsletters are short, and it will not take you very long to write an article. You can go to your state code to find a statute about animals, or you can go to case law and find a dog bite case or something like that, and you can write a short article that discusses a statute or a case, and you're putting yourself out there. It does not take very long to write an article like that. You're putting yourself out there. It's free advertising that hundreds, maybe thousands of people see, and those people have all kinds of problems. You'd be surprised how many cases there are out there. Like I said, there's people who have dogs. They have problems with apartment leases, or they have a pit bull or Rottweiler or something that the neighbor makes a complaint about, they need representation in your municipal court, something like that. But there are opportunities out there, and if you're interested in developing that kind of practice, I don't think you have to be a lawyer. I think some of these people, the lady over here from Ohio State, seems so very interested in this. I believe a lawsuit it could probably go. I know that's in a very large city there, and I know that your Humane Society there probably has a newsletter. You could start writing an article for that. They'd be very happy to have a lawyer or someone with some kind of knowledge writing an article for their newsletter. It improves their newsletter, and you're putting yourself out there for maybe thousands of people to see.
I think your point speaks to the idea of and connects with our panelists here and their groundbreaking work. It's really about realizing that there aren't these barriers. We feel like there are, but you really have to think about what you want to do and then just do it, because a lot of what's happened now has just been a result of the tenacity of this panelist. You know, go teach, go run for office, you know, get involved in you know, writing and blogging, you know, go work at the USDA, go work for Wildlife Services, go inside at different places that you wouldn't think you would want to work, so that you can get your level of expertise up in whatever it is that you're passionate about. I want to make one last plug too. So one of the things that I love about the Animal Legal Defense Fund, for those that aren't on our email list, we send job opportunities, and it's not just for ALDF. We're trying to support and build the future of animal law. So job opportunities that just came up that Kathy talked about probably yesterday at the Aquatic Animal Law Initiative Fellowship, you know, Center for Biological Diversity, Last Chance for Animals, HSUS, all these different opportunities that come up. Get on our email list so that we can keep you posted as they develop. And you know, it's a great community, and I think you'll see from our panelists here that it's really a great group of people. And so we're here to help. They're here to be resources and help everyone on their path. And for those attorneys that are here, just remember to sign out before you go so you can get your CLE credit. And hopefully you all will also go onto our app, the EventMobi app, and rank this session and let us know how it was. But we're just really grateful to our panelists here. It's really an esteemed group, and we're so grateful that you all are here with us this morning. So thank you for coming.